Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of Gamify Talks. Today's episode, we're going to talk about things slightly differently. We're going to be looking at the retail and consumer technology from an investor lens. Today, I'm hosting Sapna Shah, an 8 year angel investor who's been investing in the future of retail and consumer. She's been investing in early stage, pre seed, and seed startups. So please help me welcome Sapna Shah. Well, hi Sapna. Happy to have you here today. Thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation.
Awesome. So, look, why don't we start with like a quick introduction about yourself and what you're doing?
Sure. My name is Sapna Shah. I'm an angel investor. I've been investing for about 8 years. I invest in the future of retail and consumer at pre seed and seed. I look at everything from retail tech, marketplaces, e commerce, consumer brands, consumer tech, all the very early stage. I invest in women and underrepresented founders primarily. And I also like to add kind of value to the local ecosystem. I'm based out of New York with kind of a program that I started called Retail X Series, where I started with events, bringing in speakers to talk to really early stage founders who were just kind of starting out in the retail and consumer space. And that's expanded to a podcast, office hours, resources, and a Slack community. So that's kind of my side hustle.
Awesome. So, this is really interesting for us. So, from an investor, lens, let's say, what would you say are the like main trends for this year, for 2022?
Yeah, I mean, in this space, it's a really exciting year. And I think so much of that is because COVID really accelerated what's happening in retail and retail tech in particular. And I think we've also seen with sort of the advent of kind of the creator economy, there's been a lot happening there as well. So I kind of see some main trends. One is kind of in this creator economy with creator tools. How do you help creators monetize, find customers, market themselves? How do you kind of create these sort of platforms and tools that will help all kinds of creators from everything from kind of apparel to art to music. I think there are so many different sectors, and I think that's a really interesting trend in this space. And then retail tech has very much become a focus, particularly for larger brands and retailers who realized they were caught behind the eight ball during COVID when all of this shopping shifted online. They were not ready. E-commerce
Right.
sites were going down. They didn't have easy experiences. Checkouts were terrible. They didn't have, they weren't accepting afterpay and other kinds of things like that. And so I think we've seen a real investment by brands and retailers kind of at every level, from small, medium to big enterprise companies, really investing in retail tech. And that can include everything from like last mile, like the 15-minute delivery thing, to supply chain, to bringing tech into stores and marrying, kind of truly marrying stores and online. We've heard omni-channel for years, but I think we're starting to really see omni-channel. So I think that's kind of been another big trend. And then, I mean, I think you have to look at what's happening in terms of the metaverse and shopping, which is super early, maybe too early this year in 2022. But we're starting to see building blocks, particularly for luxury brands, kind of playing in the metaverse, building kind of AR, VR experiences, NFTs, digital twins in terms of, a physical product plus a digital product. So I think that's kind of another big piece of what we'll see coming up this year.
Interesting. And what do you think about? I always ask this question. What do you think about NFTs in specific?
I'm very early in my exploration of NFTs personally, and I don't own any. I think there is a real use case though. So I see certain use cases that are really relevant. And then, some of the other stuff, I'm just not sure. I think a lot of what you see kind of in social media about NFTs is about art and unique art. And
Music, games, and
that
art mainly.
Yeah, right. And I mean, those are great use cases, but there are also really other interesting use cases to unlock community and memberships and
Hmm.
um, and social aspects of, like, if you're part of a club and whether that's associated with a brand or a retailer or a space or travel. I think there are a lot of interesting use cases that we don't see yet, but I do think that those will come. And I think, you know, personally, in my mind, those to me are the more interesting places to exist and play.
Yep, I can't agree more. I think NFTs can play a big role, maybe not on a mass level, but like you said, maybe building small communities and private clubs within each brand or within each industry. Yeah, very interesting. So if we speak specifically about the e-commerce industries, um, what opportunities, maybe let's put it that way, what opportunities do you see in 2022? Like, yes, we do all hear about the trends, everything that's happening with the metaverse and everything. But speaking of opportunities, and specifically maybe for founders, you mentioned you're working with early stage founders, and trying to give them as much knowledge as early as possible. What should they not maybe focus on at this stage or in this year?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think there are a lot of opportunities in e-commerce, particularly on platform plays. But one of the things I'm seeing a lot right now that I don't think is going to be super helpful is like different versions of Shopify, right? That has a slightly different twist. And remember, I see companies really early. Many times I'm the first check-in, right? So they haven't vetted any of this yet with customers. And so I see a lot of these kind of, you know, it's it's Shopify meets WooCommerce meets Wix, but with this
Mm-hmm.
twist, right? So, is that just a feature that somebody else can really kind of go after, like a Shopify, or are you really doing something that's quite different? So, I think there has been a lot of that, and I think that's an area that is not as interesting from an investment perspective. Instead, I think we've seen a lot. I think we're seeing more and more e-commerce opportunities on the back end, whether that's integrating e-commerce with stores, integrating, customer profiles, customer data, social, a lot of that, pulling that data piece together. I think that's an opportunity to go after. Um, but I think some of the other things, and supply chain is another one. I think in e-commerce, I think that transparency of supply chain, I think consumers are looking for sustainability, trying to understand where things are coming from. That needs to be reflected on, websites. Things need to be able to be researched. And I think we'll see more on that front as well. Um, but yeah, I think this might not 100% answer your question. I think there was a big push in 2020 and 2021 where early stage founders basically were creating marketplaces of products and
Mm-hmm.
services, and there were
Yeah.
so many. And
Right.
they were almost all affiliate models, which is, really, like, you need a ton of scale before that makes a lot of money. And
Mm-hmm.
generally, investors don't love affiliate models without that scale. So I would say that's a place that I think in 2022, hopefully we'll see less of, because my goodness, at this point, there are plenty of marketplaces.
Yeah. Yep. So basically, you're saying founders do not build another Shopify at this moment, do not build an affiliate marketplace, and try to do something that can add to existing technologies, versus doing the same thing over and over again.
Yeah, and thinking about it, like, if I was a founder in kind of this tech space right now in e-commerce, I would say, what are the customers of 5 years from now going to be looking for, and what technologies don't exist for them? I think there are still a lot of things that are very, very difficult. The e-commerce experience on almost every website is a scroll of infinite products. That is not a
Right.
shopping experience. So how do we change that? How do we make that more relevant for Gen Z as they become the primary spenders? So that's how I would look at it if I was a founder, as opposed to looking at kind of what's out there today and tweaking it a little bit.
Okay, well, I love it. I think we're aligned here. So that would take me to my next question, my probably my favorite question, and I would like to get your insights or your perspective on gamification with e-commerce, customer loyalty programs, and probably personalization and recommendations.
Sure. So I'll start with saying that I think all of those things create loyalty, but also can be used to create community. And I focus a lot in my investing in brands on how they can create community. And so I think all of those pieces are very relevant. So loyalty and kind of the post-purchase experience, I think many brands are missing, right? They are not doing much, kind of depending on word of mouth, or send your friend this code. And
Yep.
your friend, you may not be in that mode at that moment. So I think coming up with different ways to create that loyalty. I think gamification is really interesting for certain customer segments. And I think that's really important to realize, like, who is the customer, and if you have a brand and that customer segment is a segment that will appreciate games and that gamification of maybe that post-purchase experience or engagement on a website, that is absolutely going to be important. But I think it's kind of building the mix by brand of really realizing kind of what you want to do, and how do you build that, and what technologies do you need. And I don't think they're all kind of a one size fits all. Um, and you mentioned personalization and recommendations. I think we've seen so many companies really try to build personalization and to really create great recommendation engines, but even Amazon is not good at that yet, right? You get a lot of weird stuff in your recommendations on Amazon, no matter how much you use it. So I think there is a question of, you know, how much data do you need, and how do you employ that data with your specific customer base. But I think those are clearly opportunities for so many brands and retailers, because they're doing so little of it.
Yep. It's really interesting, and I can agree also about Amazon sending weird recommendations, out of the blue. But I think they're doing something, and I think probably the smaller brands are deprived of access to such technologies, maybe. So it would be interesting to see more mature, let's say, technologies out there on the market helping Shopify type of stores, I believe. Um, that would take me to my next question about, what is it like? What is the environment of investing for you in the e-commerce?
So, I've been investing in this space for over 8 years, and there was a lull period of about 3, maybe 4 years, where there was not a lot of investment in the area. There weren't a lot of VCs focused on it. Angels didn't like the space, particularly retail. Anything that you could kind of classify as retail tech was like out of favor. And, again, with
Do you
COVID,
know why?
really,
Is there a specific, like,
oh, yeah, yeah, for sure. So it was out of favor because investors didn't think the exits were there. They thought these companies couldn't scale to $1 billion, and there
okay.
hadn't been a lot that had, to be honest. With the exception of the big platforms like a Shopify and WooCommerce and Wix and Magento, and with the exception of those, you hadn't really seen the scaling. And so a lot of investors backed away from the space. At least I was always in it, but I would hear from others that said, we don't really love the space. The exits aren't really good. Some of my portfolio companies would hear that from investors as well. And then, like I said, with COVID, the world changed in terms of how consumers think about buying, and buying online became, so
The
important.
only thing.
The
Yeah.
only thing you could do for so long.
Yeah. Yeah.
And suddenly, I think investors saw there are some real opportunities here, particularly in the payment space, which I think
Mm-hmm.
has been, there have been huge valuations of like either fast checkout or, you know, what we used to call
Buy now, pay
layaway.
later, maybe.
Yes, yes, buy now,
Yeah,
pay later,
yeah.
um, or even some pieces of like social commerce and live streaming commerce, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
all of those things I think have come a little bit back into fashion for investors, which is great news for founders in the space because there are more VCs and angels willing to look at the space and more willing to invest. So I think it's really good news. Let's hope it lasts. But I think we're starting to see companies really get to scale and even, I'll say even in my portfolio of my retail tech companies, their kind of customer acquisition has improved dramatically of late. So I think you're starting to see even maybe earlier stage companies in the space starting to scale, and you know, it's not such a tough place where it used to be for founders who were trying to sell their first couple customers, trying to sell like a Macy's or somebody like that, and they just wouldn't even talk to you. Now they're out there looking for what's next, right? So the
Mm-hmm.
world has very much changed for these kinds of companies, and I think investors are sitting up and taking notice.
Awesome. So would you say like now it became a competitive landscape for investing?
Yes, depending on the particular subcategory. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, let's talk about those 15-minute grocery delivery companies.
Yeah.
You know, that's a competitive space, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anything in payments is very competitive. I think live streaming shopping has become very competitive. Valuations have
Mm-hmm.
gone up, sizes of deals have gone up. I think social commerce has been maybe less so. I think there's some that maybe we haven't quite figured that out yet, just in terms of where that's going. Um, and I think it really depends now on how much traction these companies can show, and are they in a space where maybe other investors have seen that scale is possible.
Mm-hmm. Got it. And on the live commerce portion, do you see this like growing in the US market? Because I've seen so many people, try to use it, but has it picked up yet, do you think?
I don't think we're ever going to be to the point that China is at, right? I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
think that is built into the fabric of the way they shop and the way they shop on mobile and online. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that we're going to get there. I don't think. Um, I can't read the future, but if I had to bet, I would say we're not live streaming and live commerce is not going to be as prevalent here in the
Mm-hmm.
US. But I will say that I think it is very interesting for event-based commerce.
Okay.
New product drops, tutorials. I mean, we have things like this, right? They're just on TV, HSN, QVC, right? And those
Mm-hmm. True.
that has been the model. Now we're sort of just moving it to a different platform. But the question, and those HSN, QVC shoppers, I think are that might not be the segment that many of the startups in this space are going after. But I think there is a market for it. I think though it really right now we're seeing it more as event based. So you
Mm-hmm.
know it's a once a month or once a week thing, not every day.
Right. Yep. I mean, yeah, once a month, once a week, again, probably contributes to community building as well. Maybe not for direct conversions, but yeah, uh, community building is just as important, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it can
Cool.
really help on the community front.
Yeah. And last but not least, what is interesting out there? What would you say there's some interesting news in the industry?
Yeah, I mean, this is a little bit different than some of the things we've been talking about, but the big news in this past sort of week and a half has been closing of stores. Amazon
Mm-hmm.
closed 68 of their physical bricks and mortar stores that
Wow.
were their four-star stores, bookstores. Um, I don't know that a lot of reasons were given. 68 is a drop in the bucket compared to, the rest of Amazon. So,
Hmm.
I think that it, maybe it wasn't surprising. Maybe it was. Maybe they
Well, it is
tested and
something.
learned some things. It's something. It's
Yeah,
news. It's
yeah,
news.
yeah, yeah.
Um, but maybe what they tested, it didn't make a difference and to the overall company, or they learned what they needed to learn. So that announcement happened pretty close in time to the announcement of Beta closing its stores,
Hmm.
which was one of when it first launched. It was one of these companies that was really touted as the store of the future, where you could go in and test tech products and play with them, and sort of have almost a more curated experience of a Best Buy with the newest and latest tech. And
Hmm.
Beta just announced that they're closing all 20 of their stores because they couldn't negotiate their leases. But that is surprise. I think that was probably pretty surprising. They did have leases in high rent spaces, but
Hmm.
it did seem like a concept that was going to be very much the future of stores, where you don't hold a lot of inventory, because why would you do that? You have small spaces, and you help early, new brands, D2C brands people haven't heard of, and you help them touch and feel and try the product. I mean, that makes a lot of sense.
Hmm.
But yeah, that they also, announced that they're closing all their stores. So it was
Interesting.
sort of a strange week.
D-
Yeah, especially when you think about pandemic restrictions being, lifted and people coming back to stores.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. And would you think we're going to be seeing more of that? More, store closures or?
I mean,
I think
I
it's.
think we're
Hmm.
expected to see a lot of store closures this year, mostly though from old legacy brands, right? Who are
Hmm.
still consolidating their store portfolios. America is vastly overstored compared to every other
Hmm.
country in terms of population. So it's not surprising that, if um, big department stores are saying we're still going to close underperforming stores. I think the reason both of these things were surprising is because they aren't legacy brands closing stores. They are
Hmm.
younger store concepts that close. So I think that's more surprising. But we're also seeing D2C brands say they're going to open stores this year. So
Yeah,
it's sort of a
this is
mix. Things
encouraging.
are,
Yeah, it's a mix
yeah.
for sure. Well, awesome. I mean, Sapna, this was really, really helpful and informative for everybody listening to us. Thank you so much, for joining us today and for all the valuable information.
Thank you for having me.